Well, it's an absolute pleasure to speak to Rajesh Sundaram. He's a veteran journalist and former editor of ANN7. He's also the author of Indentured, Behind the Scenes at Gupta TV. Mr. Sundaram, thank you for joining me from the other side of the world. We met each other many years ago. I think it must have been 2012 or 2013. And over the years,
it wasn't. Oh, and it's thank you very much for inviting me.
And a lot has happened since then. You've obviously, you established ANN7. You fled South Africa eventually. The Guptas bodyguards were after you at some point. I have done a piece on that in the past. Working for the Guptas really wasn't good for your health. You wrote a book. You've testified at the state capture inquiry. A lot has happened. I'm interested to know how you absorbed the news that the Gupta brothers, Atul and Rajesh, had been arrested in Dubai on, well, the statement came out on Monday evening. How did you absorb that information?
Well, for me, it was a very good friend who sent me a text message. It was the middle of the night here. And I had a smile on my face when I saw that, because this comes to me personally after a lot of frustration. As you know, when I left South Africa in the circumstances that I left, there was a sense of humiliation. There was a lot of anger. And also, there was continued intimidation after I reached India, because I got a legal notice from the Guptas telling me not to talk to the media, demanding that I not write a book. Of course, at that time, because I was angry and I really didn't care about them, so I replied to them saying that I'll continue to talk to the media. And well, that is when I started writing the book, immediately after I came here, and I sent the draft and the script to the publisher in a few months. But it took the book many more years to be published, because there were a lot of legal challenges that were posed from both the Guptas and from the presidency at that time. And I was told at that time by many people that the Guptas have retained all the top lawyers. And, for them, it's pocket change to file for defamation and all of those things. So it was frustrating those many years, having written that book, published, worked on that draft, and it not seeing the light of day. And but I think there was some ray of light when I got a call from the publisher telling me that the Gupta leaks had happened and around 2018, and they wanted to publish the book. I said, of course, and the book was published. It was received well. And even after that, there were a lot of attempts from the time I made, when I started talking to the media, rubbishing what I was saying. I remember there was one time when Nazim Hova said that this is a disgruntled employee who's, So yes, when I got that news, it came after a long time. I think it was almost a decade of struggle that one humiliation. I had it on the back of my head that probably these guys would get away, that these guys are too powerful and too strong, and they would get away with not just what they were doing, but with all the corruption. And when I saw the Zondo Commission and the testimonies that were coming on, the documents, the truckloads of evidence that was being collected, and them sitting in faraway Dubai, not responding or rubbishing the entire process of the judicial inquiry, there was some times when I thought, is this all futile? Will they ever, be a point where they would be brought to justice in court in South Africa? And when I read that message in the middle of the night, that's when I had a smile on my face, and I said, yes, this is the first step. There is an extradition treaty. UAE is under a lot of pressure after the FATF action that was taken against them. The FATF, the Paris-based organization, which had put them on a grey list of countries which were did not have adequate infrastructural wherewithal to stop money laundering and terror financing. So as an investment destination, that's not a tag that the UAE wanted. And, they would have definitely wanted people like the Guptas, to be shived out of the investors who were there. So yes, all of it came together, and the the Guptas at one point thought they were invincible. They thought they were like Ozymandias, that they would never fall. And I think finally the first ray of light is there. I'm told it's going to take much more time, but yes, there is a sense of relief that finally there is a high possibility that they would face a court in South Africa, and there would be a process where they would get a fair a trial, and at the end of it, they would get the punishment as per the law.
It's still not an image that I can actually fathom, and that is Atul Gupta in handcuffs. It's not something that I can even imagine. I want to ask about the reception of this news in India, because obviously South Africa has a vested interest. They are most possibly one of our worst exports to the United Arab Emirates. How do Indians feel about the Guptas, and what comes behind that name? In South Africa, it's a very negative connotation, obviously. What's it like in India?
Well, in India, initially, there was a lot of awe around their name because, here were these billionaires who claimed they were self-made, they were these lavish weddings that they held here, or religious functions in their hometown. So the vernacular media here would carry stories about how they have landed in helicopters and they were moving around in luxury. But I think over a period of time, a lot of this news has come back in. They initially tried to have a media campaign where they said that it was their rivals who were hitting back at them. They said that it was all politics. They said it was all about that whole concept that they have of victims, etc. But I think soon people have seen through it. I've seen the media coverage about the Guptas over the last few years, and clearly now, with a lot of the international agencies coming out with factual reporting and much of that being carried in the Indian media, the perception of the Guptas has definitely changed. We've also had our own agencies, especially the Income Tax Department, which has investigated their transactions, about them bringing in huge amounts of money from abroad, especially to construct a temple that they're doing here in the name of their father. So all of that is under investigation. And here, I've got a lot of calls from people wanting to know about my reaction. And there is a sense that, they were these people who made a lot of, they had the ill-gotten wealth. And then finally, karma has caught up with them.
Astonishing. Have the Guptas been traveling back to India a lot in the last couple of years?
Oh yes, they have been traveling a lot. If you remember, there were at least two very high-profile cases where the media highlighted them and actually calling the media in to report about them. One, of course, was the wedding in the Himalayan meadows in Oli, yes, where they broke all laws and
environmental laws, yes,
laws and every other law, including certain orders, strictures of the Supreme Court of India, which prohibited the kind of infrastructure that they made for that wedding. It is the pristine Himalayan meadows, and nobody has a business going there and flaunting their money and bringing helicopter sorties full of guests there and ruining the ecology and leaving back tons of garbage. So yes, I mean, that's something that they were very adamant about. They were talking to the media, saying that they're doing of that particular state. They had virtually all politicians across the spectrum, opposition and ruling party, who attended that wedding. There were also talks about how they are investing into a few projects into India. Although none of that was verified, there was talk about how there is a large company which manufactures Ayurvedic products, or the Indian medicine products, and they wanted to market it globally for them. And also they were in talks with a few other groups, but I think all of that settled down really after the the US Treasury announced sanctions on them. So then a lot of the businessmen who initially did not know were a little wary about them. Also, I believe, more recently, they've had raids at their properties in India by the income tax department. That's when they came into light. Also, there are a lot of these religious, like the Kumbh Mela, which attracts millions of Hindus to a holy river. They've been regular visitors there, and they flaunt their privileges there. They scream and shout at the policemen. As you can imagine, when there are millions of people coming in, especially when there's COVID, there are a lot of restrictions. But they wouldn't follow any of that. They would want to park their cars where it's not allowed. They would want to go take a shortcut, which is not allowed. They would want to be right at the front of a procession, which may not necessarily be allowed. You could see Atul Gupta screaming at constables, telling them that he knows their the top police brass or the politicians of the state, and he'll get them transferred, or they'd lose their jobs. So yes, I mean, the arrogance was still there. They were throwing their weight around all of them, and there was also a sense of privilege which could have come from having friends in the right places in the bureaucracy and the political circles here in India as well.
Are you optimistic that we know that wealthy individuals, and they are super wealthy, are able to buy a lot in this world? But are you optimistic that maybe the money has run dry, maybe their runway they've run out of runway, that in the next year or two, barring any hiccup in this extradition process, and as you say, that is a whole process on its own, that they will be back in South Africa? Are you optimistic that we're actually going to see justice in this case?
Well, I have no reason not to be optimistic, although I would know that this is a lengthy process. As per the extradition treaties, there are certain laws, some of them under the tenets of natural justice, where the person who's accused or has got a court in another country has a right to appeal in multiple courts in the country from where the extradition is being sought. So I would have no reason not to believe that the Guptas would hire the best lawyers in the UAE and go through the whole process. They would appeal in all the courts of law that they can until they come to the last court of law. They would spend whatever money they have to rubbish the evidence that has been presented in the court in South Africa. They will try to do all of that. And of course, the biggest element we have to consider here is that only Atul Gupta and Rajesh Gupta have been arrested, and they're behind bars. You've got Ajay Gupta, who's out, and he's there doing all of this for them, creating a legal team. I'm guessing that's what he'd be doing there right now, getting all the resources of the family together to make sure that they're able to prolong this for as much as possible. We've had cases in India where there have been fugitives of law who've defrauded our banks, our government-owned banks, and they've been sitting in the Caribbean islands. They've been sitting even in countries like the UK, and the process of extradition, the legal process has taken years, and it has been frustrating. But having said that, am I optimistic? Absolutely, I am, because if after these many years there is an extradition treaty that was signed. Also, one has to keep in mind that the FATF action, which the UAE wants to get that tag away from them, the tag of being on the grey list. And I think if they want to prove to the world that they really are moving away from that legacy they have of not having strong enough institutions to keep out money laundering and terror financing, etc., they will have to show it. And I think one of the biggest way that they can to the Paris-based FATF and all the other member countries there is to have this high-profile case off their chest and saying, look, here is this guy who was sought by South Africa. He's accused of, these three brothers are accused of looting these many $1 billion, and we've given them back to South Africa to face justice. So for the UAE, this is a test case as well. So that's what gives me optimism all the more.
I wrote an editorial on Monday night. Once the news came out, I wasn't able to sleep. So I eventually came to the office and just started writing. And I said that if I was one of the Gupta brothers, I would have greased every single palm from Durban to Dubai to Delhi in anticipation of a day like this. It's extraordinary to me that they must have missed somebody, that this actually became an eventuality. I was surprised. I'm surprised you're not more surprised that they actually got arrested.
Well, I am surprised, but I think I saw it coming, a few months ago. I think it was March when the FATF, the Paris-based organization, which I think a lot depends on it. They put two countries there. There are serious implications of being part of the grey list. Your banking sector comes under a cloud. So, for a place like Dubai, for a place like UAE, which is at the center of international commerce, which is at the center of international investments and all of those things, and finance, for them to be out of that list is very, very important. So I think from March till now, because you've had an extradition treaty for a year now, but it moved very quickly after March because, it's in the interest of the UAE to get rid of them as soon as possible. Because these grey lists are reviewed. The grey list, you are taken away from the grey list only when you make the required changes in your legislation, when you make the required changes in your legal system, when you make the required changes in your banking norms, when you make the required changes in your international relations with other countries and ratify some of the conventions and treaties that are very harsh against money laundering and terror financing, etc. So to be seen as doing that is very important as well. So I'm sure they're also doing the legislative changes that have been prescribed. They're doing all of the other things. But I think if they have a couple of these high-profile cases, seen as having taken against them, in the next review, perhaps we would see the UAE getting out of the grey list as well. Because right now they're in the Pakistan or a Turkey or which they think is not fair.
I want to end off by asking on a personal level. You worked very closely with them, obviously, in the establishment of ANN7. You were in the room. You've testified about being in the room with the former president, Jacob Zuma, the Guptas, when they were discussing the creation of ANN7. Allegedly, Jacob Zuma's the brainchild of Jacob Zuma, as you've testified in the past. What is the most common question you get when you say that you worked for the Guptas? What's the one thing that sticks with you about working with the Guptas? I worked with the Guptas, but at a very different level, very arm's length. I was very junior in the newsroom. You were at a very senior level. What's the one memory that sticks with you from working with them?
I think it was the arrogance. They thought, even when they went and met the president, I could see the impatience in the brothers, especially Ajay Gupta. If the president were delayed by a few minutes, and even if he's with his cabinet ministers, he would throw a tantrum there. So clearly, I think the impression I have of them were people who thought that they had all the privileges. They thought that they could do anything, they could make any changes, and they would get away with it. I think that was really the case. They thought they would get away with it, and that was very deeply ingrained within that family and the brothers, that there were some divine powers they had, and they could do whatever they wanted to break whatever laws they wanted to break, and they would get away with it eventually. So that is what I remember. As a matter of fact, I was just sitting and writing an article. I don't know who's going to publish it, about the Guptas, the Gupta brothers of Johannesburg that I knew. So I'm putting together a piece, a long form on each of those brothers and their characteristics, etc. So so I'm working on that, and whatever memories I have of each of the brothers, and putting that together. So so that's that would. It's interesting you asked the question, because that's where my thoughts were when I was writing that.
Well, I would love to read that one day. Thank you, Rajesh Sundaram. Thank you for writing that book. Thank you for your testimony at the State Capture Inquiry. And thank you for speaking to me today.
Thank you very much, Michael.